All right, if you want to dive into this agenda, on the agenda starts on the second page of that document I sent out. So we'll talk about I'll give you a brief overview here in section 1 of the work completed as compared to which items were marked urgent on our technical agenda for 2018, technical roadmap. So the first urgent high priority item on the technical roadmap was to offer a low cost storage preservation option. And that is the glacier only option, which is in production now, and I will describe it a little further below. I think that'll occasion some discussion because there are some trade-offs if you choose that glacier only storage option. It's cheaper, but there are some things that you don't get with it that you do get with our standard option. The second high priority item was some depositors wanted us to provide storage area where items were encrypted at rest. At the moment, we do not have encryption turned on for our standard S3 storage. It is turned on by default in Glacier, but if you store items right now in our standard storage option, you're going to have unencrypted stuff sitting in S3 and then encrypted copies sitting in Glacier. AWS manages those encryption keys for Glacier. So at the moment, with the new Glacier storage option, you do have an option if you need to put something away for a while and it has to be encrypted. If you put it in our Glacier only storage, it will be encrypted, but AWS will manage those encryption keys, and we can talk a little bit more about that further on in the discussion. Christian has an item on his task list to look into all available encryption options and see what the trade-offs are and what the different use cases may be. He's going to look into that. We'll probably wind up talking about it more at our next partner meeting. The third urgent item on the roadmap was to simplify the deposit process and improve training and reporting. Dart, the graphical tool, simplifies the deposit process for new users. It is not yet suitable for people who are depositing lots of bags because it's not yet scriptable. That's going to be on the roadmap. So Dart, gives you a nice drag and drop way of putting stuff into AP Trust. But it's not going to work if you need to put in 500 bags or 1,000 bags. You don't want to drag and drop that many items. And Kelly has done some work on reporting in our AP Trust in a Pharos web console. The last of our urgent items for the tech team was to complete AP Trust security policies and testing routines. We've not completed those, but we've done a lot of work towards those ends. Updating password complexity rules and expiration. The code to implement that is finished, but we haven't deployed it yet to production because it's something we wanted to alert all the depositors to before we make that change. Kelly's working on multi-factor authentication for Pharos, and we've been making a gradual change going from institution level AWS access keys to user level AWS access keys. And the new AWS access keys will expire and be reissued on a regular schedule. We haven't determined that schedule yet. But the user level keys make it easier for administrators to revoke the AWS access of someone who's left their organization. In the past, we had to disable the organization's key and reissue it. And that doesn't make a lot of sense in the long term. So section 2 of this agenda, this is the meat of it. We're going to dig in a little further to the items that I gave an overview of in section 1. So first is the glacier-only storage option, which came from requests from a number of depositors for a less expensive storage option and an option that provides encryption. Up until now, when you upload a bag to AP Trust, it would automatically go into our standard storage, which is S3 in Virginia and Glacier in Oregon. We added a new storage option tag to the AP Trust info.txt file. If that tag is not there, we just assume it's standard storage as it's always been. So if you're uploading bags to us from your existing bagging software and that tag is not there, you're going to get the exact same behavior that you've always seen from us. If you do include that storage option tag, you can specify standard storage or Glacier, Ohio, Glacier, Virginia, or Glacier, Oregon. And we will instead store the bag in one of those 3 Glacier areas. Again, that storage in Glacier is encrypted by default, and it's substantially cheaper than our standard storage, $60 per terabyte per year versus $420. We do not do fixity checking for the Glacier-only storage, so it's not quite the same level of preservation, active preservation service that you get with our standard storage option. Amazon does internally do fixity checks on Glacier materials. They don't report how or when. All they guarantee is that if they come across a corrupted file, they will replace it with a good copy of that file. Glacier, like S3, keeps 3 copies of everything you store there. So, you know, if something is corrupted, Amazon internally, behind the scenes, copies over the bad file with a good one and just tells you everything is fine. Again, that's not the same level of preservation services that you would expect, where if that happened in AP Trust, we would record a premise event for the failed fixity check. We would tell you that we overwrote the file. Amazon just does it and you never hear about it. So the Glacier-only storage is not a complete preservation solution, but it may be a component of one, and it may serve in some special use cases like we've had at UVA, where we get an entire hard drive and we have to take a disk image of it and return the drive to the owner. We don't know what's on it. We don't know if it has personally identifiable information. But we need to store a copy of it somewhere until someone at the library can process it. So in that case, Glacier only can be helpful for you to store an encrypted copy of something that you don't have time to process now, but you may have time to process in 6 months. That Glacier only storage, which is so much cheaper than our standard storage, is something that we are going to reevaluate in a year. Glacier does have some hidden costs that can be fairly steep. One of them is early access retrieval. And another is if you're retrieving substantial amounts of data. Hey, Robin, can you put your mic on mute? If you're retrieving more than 5% of your material in any given month, you can incur some fees. So we're going to watch the usage pattern for Glacier over the next year and see if we need to reevaluate that pricing scheme. Down on the bottom of that first page of the agenda, under Glacier only storage item G, there's a list to, or a link to our list of services and fees. That will give you some more information about the cost of Glacier and standard storage. And at the top of the next page, item H says Glacier-only storage has a few other limitations, such as no push to deepen. For more information, follow that link ingest and storage options. That goes to our wiki and will describe to you some things you should take into consideration before choosing standard or Glacier-only storage. Do you guys have questions or concerns about Glacier-only so far?
Yes.
Andrew, this is Tim. I have a question about converting from standard storage to Glacier only.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to have stuff that was pushed to deepen, if you could have it in standard storage for some period of time and then convert it to Glacier only.
At the moment, there's no way to convert. You would have to actually re-upload it, like delete it and re-upload it. And yeah, that's the simple answer. Hold on, I'm just making a note here. There's one tricky thing we had to take into consideration with Glacier-only storage is bag updating. You know, as the system works now, if you upload a bag today and then you upload a new version of that same bag in a year, and the new version has changed 3 files, we compare the files in the new version versus what we stored before, and if those checksums don't match, we overwrite the old version with the new. It gets really tricky if the old version is in standard storage and you say that new version should be in Glacier, Ohio. We don't want to wind up in a situation where we have 2 separate versions of the bag, one in standard storage and one in Glacier, Ohio. So there's this limitation or restriction that says whatever storage service you first chose for that bag, every subsequent version of that bag is going to go into the same storage service.
Oh, okay.
And the only way around that really is to delete the original bag and then re-upload it with a new storage option. So that gets a little confusing, but we have it documented, and if you guys ever have questions about how that's going to work out or what the consequences may be, you know, get in touch with us. We're here to answer questions like that.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else on Glacier only?
Andrew, what if this isn't a Glacier only question, but what you just explained prompted another question. What if you restored something with multiple versions there? What do you get back?
You get back the latest version, the last uploaded version of all files. And in some cases, that may even mean, say, the last version of a bag that you uploaded did not include a couple of files that were in the original version. The restored version is going to amount to that last version you uploaded, plus those couple of files that weren't even in the last version, but were in the previous one. We don't delete stuff. We leave it, the depositor has to delete. But essentially, what you get back is the last uploaded version of every file minus anything you personally deleted. And we have an item, an open ticket for something that you brought up actually, which is to include a dump of the premise events in the restored bag, because it's almost guaranteed there are going to be some cases where the depositor has uploaded multiple versions of the bag and they pull one back you know, they restore it and it looks like the last uploaded version plus a few remnants from previous versions, and they're wondering, why does my bag look like this? Or they restore a bag where one file is gone and they want to know why it isn't there. They could log into Pharos and see the deletion event from the missing file. But ideally, it should be right in the bag itself, right? So that's one of our to-do items. Restored bags in the near future will include probably a JSON dump of premise events, so that you, the depositor, know why the bag is in the state it's in when you get it back.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Anyone else? So we added another new feature. This is number 2 on the agenda, in the second section of the agenda, single file restore. And it works for both standard and Glacier only files. Though with Glacier only, it takes a little bit longer because Glacier restorations include an extra step. Let's see. I'm going to try to share. Can you guys see my screen with, it says bag group test 2? Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. So up until now, you've had this restore object button down here. Can you see my mouse moving? I can't see what everyone else sees. If you go into preserved files at this point and click on any file, you'll see an option to restore that one file. And once you restore it, I don't think we're sending out alerts at this point when that restoration is ready, but you will see a completed work item. Let's see if I can find one of these. You will see a completed work item when that file is restored, and it will give you, I'm sorry, where's this? Oh, here it is. It will give you the location to which we restored that file. It'll be in your restoration bucket. And again, you can pull work items back through our REST API if you're trying to automate things. At the moment, that URL isn't so easily parsed by JavaScript or Python script, but it essentially amounts to the URL of your receiving bucket plus the generic file identifier. So single item restore is one new development. Another one is this bag group identifier. This is one that Terry Brady's been asking for a long time, and I'm sorry it took us so long to get to it. Bag group identifier is part of the Bagot spec. I believe it goes in the baginfo.txt file, and it allows you to logically group bags together into a collection or anything that's meaningful to you, into some kind of meaningful group. We're finally parsing that information, the bag group identifier, and it's searchable now, so you can find all your bags that belong to a specific group. And if you go to the bag detail page for a bag that has a non-empty bag group identifier, and you click on that, it'll show you all the bags in that group.
Well, thank you for having that going.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Terry, have the bags you've uploaded in the past included that bag group identifier?
They have. We haven't gone in and verified. Like I'm gonna go run some tests here to see if it's behaving as we hoped it would for what we've sent up.
Okay, so I was wondering if you were relying on that somehow being retroactively filled in for all your existing bags.
I think ideally it'd be great if if it could be, and if we ever need to restore a collection. But we'll see what we see and get in touch.
Okay. The reason I brought that up is, at the AWS conference in DC, I went to some presentations about AWS tools that can scan through huge numbers of files in S3 buckets and do data analysis on them or pull back data from them. And we're looking at that a little further down the road to possibly redo our file characterization. If you notice when you look at reports, I don't know if you've looked at them, if you look at your own content in Pharos, you'll see a great number of files are identified simply as application binary because we couldn't identify them correctly. At some point, it may be possible for us to sweep through the S3 buckets and recharacterize those files and see if we can get a better match on them. But I was thinking that possibly for a good first stab at that type of work where we're doing like distributed analysis on those S3 items, a simpler test case may be to scan through all the bag info files and pull back all the bag group identifiers and see if we can match those up. But that's
we should definitely have. We've been sending that up for quite a while. So
okay, yeah. It actually we might want to pull back all of those tags because not just bag group identifier, but pull them all back and store them somehow. In the past, we have simply ignored the ones that are not relevant to Pharos or to our processing. And that was part of the really early, that was a very early design decision before we even launched. And part of it came from Scott's fear of having to create this triple store that would just grow like beyond reason and become unmanageable. But we actually do have that data still there from the bag info files and the AP Trust info files. So maybe at some point we'll come back through and be able to pull meaningful information out of those.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
How scary does this possible feature request sound? Batch restore by bag group identifier.
Oh, that doesn't sound very hard at all. I mean, it would just, on the Pharos end, we would look up all the bags that match that bag group identifier and then create a single restore request for each bag. And from there, the services would just run as they already do.
Is having that with the bag group identifier feature really might make me rethink the bagging strategy overall. But all right, awesome, thanks.
Yeah, definitely. I can put a ticket for that into our tracker because it wouldn't be that hard to implement. Okay, so bag group identifier I just went through. Christian has done some work on centralized logging. AP Trust actually runs a bunch of microservices and a couple of Rails apps spread across different servers, and they have been all logging locally. So going in to figure out problems meant going into the individual servers and pulling out the logs from there. Christian, you're on right now, right?
Yeah, I'm here.
So the centralized logging helps us with alerting and reporting and auditing. It gives us just one place to go to do all of that. Do you want to talk at all about centralized logging, like what you set up and what you see the benefits of that doing?
Yeah, sure, I can. Yeah. So it's a product called Graylog. It's a Rails application. It runs Elasticsearch in the background. The same as you might have heard of Kibana and Elastic Elk Stack or whatever. It's just the same thing. It basically like ingests all log files, structures them, and then you can query time frames of like across all logs at the same time, so you can do better analysis of what went wrong where. Yeah, and it's like in production right now, but it doesn't have all the logs just yet. I'm still working on some of the ingest services to push the logs there. And I have to see how fast it grows because it's a lot of, data that gets in there for the logs. Yeah, but that works, and it allows you to set alerts to if there's, like a 400 error or a 500 error on the web service, and it'll alert us on Slack if there's anything wrong, like exceptions in the Rails code or anything like that.
All right. And Kelly, as I mentioned earlier, has implemented some new requirements for password complexity and expiration. Again, that code is not yet deployed to production. Do you all have any particular concerns about having to change your passwords in Poros to meet new complexity rules, or having to change them periodically? Right.
Following like the new, I think the new NIST guidelines actually suggest not changing periodically.
Okay. Can you point me to those guidelines and we'll take a look?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. All right. Well, before we push any of this out into production, we will give you warning, and I'll review what NIST says about password rotation, and I believe we can configure things accordingly. Again, related to security, we've begun to move from institution level AWS access keys to individual level AWS access keys. So far, that's gone pretty smoothly. It should be less of an issue with depositors who don't yet have AWS access keys because they wouldn't have an institution level key that they need to replace. If you guys have questions or concerns about AWS keys, you can contact Christian or me, or just help@aptrust.org. We can answer questions about that. Other items, Kelly's done some improvements on internal cost reporting and database improvements on the live server. We ran into a few issues using Postgres when tables start getting into the millions of rows. It needs a little tuning and some occasional vacuuming. So Kelly's been working on that. She's been keeping our gems up to date and making minor improvements to the reports that she showed at the spring meeting.
I do want to chime in and say I was able to use those reports for one of my administrative reporting out to my senior administration, and it was very helpful. So thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome. I'm really glad it helped.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Christian, as I mentioned, that's upcoming. Christian is working on Docker containerization. And do you want to talk about that, Christian?
Yeah, actually the logging service is the first production service that is in a Docker container. I Dockerize all other services already, but there's some more configuring that I have to do before attempting a deployment in the development environment and doing some more testing. I'll probably be done by the end of the year, I think.
When we have Docker containers for everything, are we no longer going to be using Ansible for deployment?
It'll be less Ansible, more Docker, but the basic provisioning of the server, like installing a Docker daemon, would still be Ansible. But it will be less. I mean, deployment for Pharos maybe, but I'm not there yet.
All right. The last couple things, Christian has implemented secondary database backups to S3. That's in addition to the database backups that Amazon Web Services does for us. It's just an extra level of security in case anything ever happens to the Pharos database, which is where all of our metadata is stored. We now have additional recourses. And I finished the stable prototype of Darts, which I demonstrated at the spring meeting. I presented that at Open Repositories last month and seemed to get some interest in it. Going forward, again, it is stable, but only if you're doing a few simple basic operations, bagging according to the AP Trust profile and uploading to AP Trust. In the future, it'll be able to do more than that, but that's a big part of my upcoming work, is to refactor Dart to make it well documented, well tested, and maintainable. And also to work on the Dart command line tools so that people whose bagging workflows are written in Python or Ruby or any other language can use some of these Dart tools in their scripts. And that makes it useful for larger scale operations. Other upcoming work, Kelly's got some reporting work to do and right now is working on multi-factor authentication for Pharos. Christian, as I mentioned, will do some research on encryption and key management and continue that switch to individual AWS credentials. We'll implement AWS key rotation. And again, I'll take a look at the NIST guidelines. I'm not sure if they apply as well to like API keys and access keys. And Christian is continuing to move to Docker and to Terraform for provisioning infrastructure. I don't know if that is of interest to everyone, but if you have questions, you can ask Christian while he's on the line. All right. I also have to implement deep and fixity checking and restoration spot tests. This is part of our ongoing testing and security. Fixity checks, ensure file by file that we still have the files there and they are in a valid and complete state. Restoration spot tests, which we've done manually here and there, are really meant to ensure that the repository is working correctly end to end. That the end goal of getting your material back as you gave it to us, we want to ensure that we're actually serving that goal, and we want to be able to prove it. So we're not going to do restoration of all materials. That would be kind of excessive given the amount that we're storing now. But we will do periodic automated spot checks of restorations from both standard and Glacier-only storage.
Andrew, I've got a question. In all those fixity checks that you've run, have you caught any errors or failures that have needed to be fixed?
Yep, yes, there's one batch of failures that actually affected Columbia and UVA, and that came from an error on my part back in either late 2015 or early 2016 when we were running Fedora. We were running a Fedora to store our metadata instead of Postgres, which is what we're using now. We ran into some issues where bags were successfully ingested, and then Pharos, or at the time it was called Fluctus, did not get a satisfactory response from Fedora saying it had recorded the metadata for those bags. So there was a group of bags, about 200 of them, no, it may have been more than that, where they got ingested over and over and over and over and over again. And at the time, the ingest process was not properly keeping track of UUIDs, which it uses as file names when it puts files into long-term preservation. So the effect of ingesting these bags again and again and again was that for some bags, we had like 20 or 50 copies of every single file in the bag, all stored under different UUIDs. So we wound up with an enormous amount of essentially wasted data in our preservation storage area that we were paying for. Now, I did something back then that I would never do again. This is where the bad fixities come in. I wrote a script to identify what were all the duplicates of these files we ingested and to get rid of the duplicates. And it worked on almost everything except a handful of bags from Columbia and UVA where the bag had been ingested multiple times, but one of the ingests was actually a legitimately new ingest of a new version of the bag. And my cleanup script wound up deleting the new version of a bunch of files and keeping the first original version because it was matching against the wrong checksum. So those fixity failures were identified later in the course of normal fixity. The short of that story is in trying to clean out our preservation storage, I deleted the wrong versions of some files and our system caught it. And my lesson was like, I'll never delete anything from preservation storage ever again. The only depositors can do that now. So that was a human error and organizational policy mistake, right? To allow the admin to go in and do that. And I'm lucky it happened early on. We told Columbia and we told UVA and we gave them a list of files. And yeah, I did not feel good about that. But those are the only fixity failures that we've had.
Okay, so no like just random bit rot that occurred. It was more like an ingest process issue that caught.
It was an ingest process issue compounded by human error.
Yeah.
And yes, it caught it. Yep.
Thanks.
So yeah, those are still in the system. You know, they're premise events. A failed fixity is a premise event, and premise events, once they're written, are immutable, and they're all still in there.
Thanks.
Andrew, this is Chip. Real quickly on a clarification, Terry's question actually reveals an interesting point that's sort of combined with our discussion about what Glacier does in Amazon native fixity checking. Is it correct to say that your answer right there was to Terry's specific question about our fixity checking? Is it also correct to say that in the Glacier environment, for example, Amazon could well, in its routine behind the scenes fixity checking have overwritten a bit rot issue, and we might never know about it.
Right, that's what they do, and they don't report on those things. They just tell you your 11 nines of durability are intact.
Okay, so it doesn't. Based on your experience, it doesn't mean it never happens. It's just kind of more invisible.
That's right. Yeah, and I'm almost positive it does happen on the AWS side behind the scenes, because S3 storage is some kind of disk, either magnetic or SSD, and those things do fail periodically. And if they lose a disk, they may lose, 200,000 files. And their system is built to handle that. They plug in a new disk, they find the good copies of those 200,000 files, and they put them on the new disk. But they don't tell anyone. That's just part of daily operations there.
Great, thanks for that clarification.
Sure. So I want to leave the rest of the discussion open for questions from all of you. And I listed a few in that agenda. We talked a little bit about Glacier only, but if there are any of these topics you want to delve into specifically right now, we have about 15 minutes left. If you want to talk about how you may or may not want to use Glacier only storage, if you have specific concerns about encryption, if you are interested in AP Trust looking at other storage providers as new options, just as Glacier only is a new storage option. Do you want to go through these 1 through 4? Does someone have anything that jumps out at them right now?
Can I jump for a second back to the Terraform work that Christian is doing?
Sure.
Will that work, Christian? Reading it, and I think you talked a little bit about this at the meeting, vendor agnostic tool for provisioning infrastructure. What type of infrastructure? Is that the type of tool that will allow us to swap out the storage backend so it's, not AWS, so it's like the Wasabi or Blackblaze or something else?
Theoretically, I mean, it's basically similar to AWS's CloudFormation, where you can define or automate setting up your whole infrastructure. Terraform has plugins to talk to AWS or other providers like Google Cloud and Wasabi probably, or maybe. So yeah, that's one part of it. That's easier to do that way. So you don't have to go to any command line tools or web interfaces to like provision or set up a server. It's like codified version of the infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. And I see Linda suggesting in the chat about alternative storage providers, and I agree. I think that's something we should do and look at. Although the two that are mentioned, Wasabi and Backblaze, they are really cheap. I like them. They both do something that I don't know if AWS does, and I'm wondering if Andrew learned anything at the conference. Wasabi and Backblaze both, they split your file up into lots of little pieces, and they distribute the pieces among multiple volumes, and then they distribute the volumes among multiple disks. And they have elaborate systems to keep these things in ways to have parity among these volumes, and that's how they achieve the number of 9s for their durability. So it's not like you have a file sitting on a file system at all times, just sitting there. They make it appear that way when you browse their interface, but that's not the way the files actually live. And I'm curious if AWS does that too.
I don't know. They're not forthcoming about what they do behind the scenes. I wouldn't be surprised if they did do that to achieve their performance and level of durability, that's kind of like a giant striped RAID. You know what I mean? And I think it's certainly easier to repair small chunks of a file that has gone bad, instead of an entire multi-gigabyte file. But I don't know what AWS does behind the scenes. They are not very forthcoming about that. I think they look at it as a trade secret. And I also, actually, when I looked into Wasabi, I have this suspicion or like a fear that Wasabi may be running on AWS because their data centers are in the exact same places. And if they are, then that takes away a lot of their value for us. Backblaze is running their own data centers, and they provide another set of regions in which to store data, and they're obviously using their own technologies rather than whatever AWS is using, and they're running their own data centers. So that they definitely provide some diversity, storage and regional diversity.
And they're pretty transparent. They do a lot of posting and
Yeah.
sharing out of reliability and data about what's happening in their data centers.
And how to build the hardware that they run on. They have open sourced their hardware. So much more transparent than AWS.
Hi, do we have any idea? I'm not familiar with Wasabi and Backblaze. Like, what's their viability with compared to AWS? I mean, Amazon's likely not going anywhere.
Yeah, so that's another big issue. That, like, cloud storage is pretty. It's a pretty competitive market, and I don't know about Wasabi. I do know that Backblaze has a very loyal following, and they've been stable and growing. But even so, the fact that you have a player who is doing maybe a few $1 million worth of business per year in a market with other players who are doing billions in business per year, you have to assume that there's some risk there. This is like the kind of risk that what's his name, Neil Jeffries pointed out at PASIC a few years ago when he talked about he put up a chart of like how many universities in England have gone under in the last 1,000 years, and the number is exactly 1. And then the number of like S&P 500 companies that have disappeared in the U.S. in the last like 75 years, and there are hundreds. So, yeah, Backblaze could provide some vendor diversity, but again, there's always that risk that they're not around in 3 years or 5 years. It's hard to tell in that market. So yeah, it's a definitely legitimate concern.
Couple of quick points from the chat. Robin notes that Azure claims cheaper price than Glacier by half and have a data center in Chicago. And my response was exactly by mentioning Backblaze and Wasabi, we don't mean to limit the range of things that we'll look at. We want to take a look at everything that seems credible in the market, with the point well taken that things may disappear and different efforts may disappear, but some seem more lasting than others, and that's got to be a factor we take a look at, and why a Microsoft option might be one to look at along those lines. Dave also has in Andrew a link to Dave Kolar has a link to a project to make vendor transfers easier that might be useful in thinking about how to move back and forth between different vendors in our context as well.
That's interesting. I will check that out after the call. I'm going to cut my screen share for now. Yeah, we've been looking for a couple of years at other storage vendors, and it's only recently that a few like Wasabi and Backblaze have emerged as real and, at least for now, stable contenders. And also recently, at least over the past couple of years, more and more services have offered an S3 compliant API. And those two things make a real difference. Though Backblaze isn't completely S3 compliant, they have a similar API. But until recently, every time we looked, we just came up with a no, like those options aren't quite there yet. This is the first time where we think they may be there. And again, there's that concern of, will they be there in a year or 5 years?
I don't want to shift the conversation too much if people want to keep in this line, but I kind of want to combine the first and third questions a little bit, if there are no objections, maybe.
Go for it.
All right. So the question about, the glacier-only storage factoring into the preservation strategy, as it's currently designed, I don't see much use for it right now in our preservation strategy, unless it's some sort of, fourth or fifth type of copy. And I don't really see us necessarily doing that. And the biggest reason is I'm not really willing to give up fixity for something, even if it's unprocessed, unappraised disk images. Those could still have really valuable content on there, and I'm potentially having it at risk, having it here of something becoming corrupt or whatnot, and this sort of lower tier type of storage. But I do potentially need a cheaper option for some type of content, something like moving image. Our dean has thrown around the idea of, we need to digitize all the motion picture film of football video or football, and I don't even think we have the rights to do that necessarily, because BTAA apparently owns a lot of the rights for football stuff. But that could potentially, be petabytes of content if that actually happened. And what I would, what might work better for that is actually to have a Backblaze storage option. This is an example. I'm not necessarily saying it has to be Backblaze, but that's a heck of a lot cheaper than S3 to have a spinning disk copy that we could have fixity over. So a cheaper option that does have lower assurance, that does have some level of fixity on it. Maybe it's not every 90 days, but it's some level of assurance still being offered. Maybe it's less copies than 6 instances, if copies isn't your preferred language for this. But I don't know. To me, I can't give up fixity. It's too foundational a concept to what we're doing to count something as preservation storage. And as a side note, on the NDSA infrastructure call, I recently learned that DuraSpace actually doesn't do fixity on top of the managed storage service. They're actually only reusing fixity data from the service providers. So they're passing through, they're not doing fixity on top of. So that sort of soured me on DuraSpace a little bit too, because it's the same thing. You're just trusting to fix it someone else's, the fox watching the hen coop. So just to sort of put that out there as some sort of in-between type of option, combining these ideas.
Okay. Yeah, I've made a note of that, and I think we should ask the broader AP Trust community, because if we come up with a similar set of needs for a bunch of people, and I could see video being encased there, then that may help us choose a service to fulfill that need. And then we would also have to look at how often do we do fixity checking, and what are the retrieval costs for outside services like Wasabi and Backblaze, because within AWS, we can do the fixity checks from S3 for free because we're running them in the same region as the S3 storage, and it's all within Amazon's data center. So we're not incurring transfer fees to do that. If we are incurring fees, I believe Backblaze and Wasabi are fairly inexpensive. I think Wasabi one of them has little or no retrieval fee. But assuming there is some fee per gigabyte, we probably wouldn't want to run fixity every 90 days. It might be half that, but we could still run it. So yeah, if we put that out to the broader community and come up with a profile of what the common needs are, that can help us move forward.
And Nathan, this is Chip. I agree with the point that it's a really interesting discussion of, this is something that Kara talks about with us frequently. What makes us believe that the content that we would store that we haven't gotten to process yet is less valuable than what we're storing that is that we know what the value is? And I think it's a completely reasonable thing, and I think it really needs to reflect the environment that we continue to construct here. Needs to reflect the possibility that different people, professionals working on the content side, will have a different perspective on those kinds of issues, and we need to make sure that we can serve varying scenarios there. So I agree with you, and I think an intermediate thing is a really good thing to take a look at too. Linda posed the question online on the chat of whether there's an institution ready to use Test Glacier only, and we have the impression that there are several that are interested in using it, and I don't know whether Robin wants to speak to this or not, but one of those may be the University of Virginia.
Robin, is your mic working?
She may have had to slip off to something else, so I'll start the conversation for her. She's
okay.
Oh,
I just had to get out of the chat screen.
No problem.
So you were talking about standing up some storage here at UVA?
To whether or not you wanted to try the AP Trust Glacier option for UVA-related content.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, if we can get AP Trust hooked up to, I don't need to go to Glacier in two different ways, but I mean, we could also use the same tools to go to Glacier and to go to Azure. But, I had almost put in the chat window, Chip, we had talked about that data center down at Wise, Virginia, and it's on the other side of the Continental Divide, and you looked it up, and it was a really low risk area.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know if anybody has the appetite to look into working with someone down there to stand up cloud infrastructure in that, but I think we'd have to look at it. It just would give a little bit more variation for people potentially.
So we're about 2 minutes over. If anyone has to drop off right now, go ahead, and anyone who wants to stay on, we'll try to wrap up in the next 5 minutes.
Sounds good,
Thanks,
Adrian.
everybody.
Yeah, Robin, I agree with your point about that. It sort of gets to the point of what we're talking about here while we explore these options. Is we need to be open to a lot of options and testing them and taking advantage of moments of opportunity in that one that's UVA related, involving a second data center that's significantly different in geographic profile than the McLean, Virginia space is a good example. But so short answer to Linda's question is, we do know that there are some institutions ready to use and test Glacier, and I think UVA will test it whether or not it intends to use it all the way through the AP Trust channel, or whether there will be other options that Robin will be considering for that. That's a future question that once we figure out how well it works, all of us will be exploring, I think.
I was also excited to hear on the call that your team is using Terraform and Docker and some of the other technologies that my team's using. Because, you know, if we got in a bind, we're both using the same kind of tools.
Yeah,
we can
definitely.
help each other out.
We have those, that may be funny to some of the folks who are listening in, but the fact of the matter is Christian is talking across hallways with Robin's team on these things anyway, so that's a really good thing. All right, Andrew.
All right, I was hoping to get to that very last question, but I may send that out to the AP Trust community with a description of what that means. Not the last question, but number 4, the very last item on the agenda. It'll take me a few minutes, so I'll send that out to the community, what that last thing is all about, because I want to get some feedback from that. About
Thanks,
that.
Andrew.
All right. Anything else anyone wants to say before we end today?
Yeah, this is Tim. I put a comment in the chat. About number 2, and I don't think it needs to be addressed on the call, but I think it might be useful and to help people start thinking about what's going on with this stuff. To do something lightweight, like a little.
Yeah. So Christian is going to be looking into the different encryption options and key management options, and we'll be writing up what those options are and what the trade-offs and considerations are, because it's something we will need to discuss before we try to implement anything. And I believe we will be able to present that at the next AP Trust partner meeting.
And we'll want to make sure we have Tim in that active conversation as we're exploring those things on the way to a product too. So Tim, be ready for the call for engagement on it. Thanks.
Okay, I'm ready.
I know you are.
Only if we have to.
Say again?
I said only if we have to have Tim.
I should have known Bradley was somewhere lurking out there.
Oh boy.
Sneaks in at the end.
Yeah, take the last shot, right?
Knife at the back from Bradley. Yeah.
All right, I want to thank everyone for attending. We did record this whole conference, and I will figure out at some point how to get it online, how to put that recording up where people can get
YouTube channel.
All right.
Yeah, put it on our YouTube channel.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. If there's anything we haven't answered, feel free to email me or help at AP Trust, and we will do what we can to answer your questions.
Thanks all. This is great.
Thank you, guys.
Bye,
Bye everyone.
Bye-bye.